And we're live.
Well, game
Oh,
game on,
we're
game on.
game on. Indeed. Welcome, everyone, to our startup office hours, the Traction Lab startup office hours, where, well, it's an AMA format. Ask us anything startups. We got startup traction, we got fundraising, go-to-market strategy, team TAM, timing, traction theory, terms, technology, and tracking. Anything that you want to talk about in the startup space, hit us up with. We got some great questions submitted in advance, so we kind of pulled out a theme, or sort of a loose theme, like it's all things like related to traction and go to market and like the momentum that you get from that. So there, it's a little bit all over the place, but kind of around that same theme. So we'll get to those in just a minute, but before we do, Cam, you are not in your office.
I am not. No, I'm in sunny San Diego. I'm down here to do the rock and roll marathon. So Sunday I got 26.2 miles of blitz ahead of me. So but it's nice. We got a breeze down here, 70 degrees. Hard to complain when 100-degree weather is coming into Sacto. But of course, had to make time before I go to the beach and grab some food to come and talk startups at the startup office hours. So
obviously, you have nothing better to do, right?
yes, exactly.
So wait, what makes a marathon a rock and roll marathon?
It's like I think it's the organization that puts it on, but basically they what makes it rock and roll is they have bands throughout the entire marathon. So like last year they had, I think, Kesha was one of them. They had Goo Goo Dolls. They had so a number of big names. I don't know who's going to be here. And then at the end, where you finish, they have bands playing, and it's supposed to be a pretty big, fun kind of party.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So
I mean, you're never can only be like running along, and there's Kesha, and you're like, I love TikTok, and you just stop. Like, is that?
Well, see, that's what I was like. It's like you're kind of like you're running, and then like you maybe hear like 20 seconds of them playing, or at least you like see them playing. And I'm listening to I have music going on in my headphones, so we'll see how it is. But they do like going on. I think the same weekend they have like Rock and Roll Taipei. They have a Las Vegas one that goes, but you can like
Cool.
collect the different medals from all the rock and roll, and if you do all the rock and rolls, you get like a special thing. So that's not my goal, but I just was like, what's a fun place to go down to, and San Diego seemed like a nice place to visit, and put myself through some challenges, but nonetheless.
Well, it's going to be 104 here, so
Yes.
I think
Nonetheless,
you made a good choice.
Yeah, exactly.
My wife and I are talking this morning, like, I think the Sonoma Coast sounds pretty good right about now. Let's plan a little getaway for
the moment
my kid's
getaway.
birthday. Yeah.
There you go.
But this like this rock and roll like band placement along the marathon route reminds me of like the fountains in Roseville. That's like that outdoor shop place there.
Yep.
They in the summertime have like a concert series, and it's all like local little bands, and they set up a little place, but they'll often do like two different bands at once, like smaller bands, and they'll set up, and the place is not that big. So like when you're like right in front of the band, you basically only hear that band. Right in front of the other band, you only hear that band. But placed throughout the fountains are speakers where they just play music all the time, and they don't turn that off during the concerts.
Got it.
So like as you walk around, like you get to these points where like band, and then as one band starts to fade, like other music comes in, and if you're right at the right point, you've got like three different bands coming at you at one time.
That's a lot of stimulus.
It's a little obnoxious if I'm being honest. Like I don't know why they do that.
I think probably someone just is missing the hey, we just got to turn this thing off, and but who knows.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think one band is perfectly fine for the space, but so hopefully you get like a little bit of distance, with each of these before you hit the next one, which would also help because then you could at least hear a fraction of a song before like moving on.
What if they were like moving? They moved to they're with a certain cohort of runners,
like a float, like they just come alongside you and keep you pumped, right?
Well, so the funny thing is like while you're running, like the big things, people supporting you or just out there is like making signs, and so one of the funny ones is like world's worst parade. Just people
Well,
Other people like struggling. So, but hey, we're startups are, it's a marathon. You got to
that's
continue to
right.
push on, and you got to break through the wall and find resources and save those not save them, but utilize them in the right way along your journey. So
Well, yeah, speaking of marathons, we'll move into the questions. We may not have jam bands for y'all today, but we do have hopefully some startup wisdom to pass along in the form of answers, I guess, to questions that came in. Hopefully, we get some awesome people. Joining us online. If you have a question about anything startup related at all, drop it into the comments section, and we'll power and then answer a few questions from the till, from the little like lotto spinning thing. We'll just like reach into the drum and pull one out, and we'll keep our office hours a little bit shorter than usual today, but that's plenty of time to get through some questions as long as Cameron and I don't spend the whole time rambling.
there we go.
So let's
We
do it.
sufficiently bought some time for some people to hop on to the LinkedIn Live. So I think we're ready to officially rock now.
Awesome. Yeah,
Rock
I
and
mean
roll.
that's always the challenge with the live streams, right? So you got to like wait for people to get on because we're not really what's the term, with it enough, like on it enough to actually promote it in advance. So everybody's like, "Oh, hey, they're live."
Oh, let's hop on.
All right, cool. So the questions in advance, we got a few of them. We'll just kind of take these in order here. So. In order, meaning the order that I copied and pasted them, not in any like an order, like a run a show that I've got here. All right. So first one is, so this is I guess it's like an AI productivity tool for freelancers because there aren't enough of those. I shouldn't make fun of our questioners, but I use several of them. I'm not really making fun of the category. They're awesome, but AI productivity tool for freelancers of some kind. We've got a small but loyal group of beta users. How do we turn this into momentum? That's where the momentum in my question, in my theme, came from there.
Okay. Say that last
Um,
part again. How we turn a small group of beta users.
they called it. They say it's a small but loyal group of beta users, and they want to know
Mm,
how they like translate that into momentum.
interesting. Well, I mean, the first kind of like question, if I was like, if they were, coming to me in office hours, which, hey, they're doing here, would be like, what do they mean by loyal? Like, what actions have they taken to demonstrate that loyalty? Was it a certain amount of information they provided that like goes above and beyond their loyalty, or is it that like maybe they've been a part of like the before you even beta launch, they're a part of discussions earlier on. So like, what does that like look like beforehand? In terms of momentum, we talked about this the other day of kind of, I'd say, similar like strategies that you'd see with like a wait list or pre-orders. Was is there ways to like then engage them in that co-creative process where they're actually like feeling ownership of the future of what they're that the product ultimately like is shaped as, and that will then one empower them further and then help them kind of share more because they're like, oh, that feature was a piece of feedback that I provided, and now they have that ownership to help grow. And then I think if it's to with the intent to like bring on more users or customers, is there a way to like empower them with referrals or incentives if they're getting truly value out of what you're creating? We saw that with kind of the Whoop, right? They had referral, and like I was like, hey, I got a lot of value. I was pretty early on in adopting it. I was like, hey, Josh, I know you have similar type technologies. Let's hop in and do the Whoop thing together. And so I think there's power in that. And then now you build a stronger community. So that's where my mind goes.
Yeah, my mind went in a similar place, although I guess a little bit different in framing there. So I really want to know what small is. So a small but loyal group. And so like, is a small group 5 or is a small group 50? Because my answer is pretty
Right.
different for those two, right? And so like, for something that is for freelancers, right? So it's an individual. It's not. I guess you could say B2C, right? Even though it's like their businesses, so it's B2B. But like, it's going to have more of a B2C type model for that. And so like 50 is still a small group. Like, and I'm not balking at 5. Like 5 is great. You got to start somewhere, and if they're loyal, like that's, that's awesome. But if you're at like, 50, then we can start talking about referral triggers and, how to do some like, user driven growth and, some of those kinds of things, because you have the volume to like start playing with those. If you're at 5, I don't think it's worth playing with those yet. I don't think you're going to get the return on it. And like, we don't know if the next 10 customers look like the first 5. And so like, there's just not enough data there yet to lean into that for me. But this is where, so momentum, I'm sort of interpreting that as growth, like user growth and like user acquisition and customer acquisition. So if that's true, and we're like, all right, how do we get more customers in? Of course, the short answer is to find more like the 5, right? How many like the 5 can we get? And then we can do some channel hacking to like try to really get in front of those like cheaply and efficiently and convert them forward. All that's great, but I think one of the mistakes that is often made at this point, and this is closer to the 5 than the 50 example, right? But probably applies a little bit to both, is that we'll go, okay, well, we people love the product, we're awesome, so let's turn on the marketing engine and like start going after people. And there's a couple of challenges with that. So one is probably not the time for marketing anyway, because I doubt we've really, with 5 customers for sure, we have not demonstrated like a repeatable go-to-market engine. It's not really time to turn that on yet, and so that would be a mistake. With 50, it's going to depend on how you got them. If they all came from like waitlist and pre-signups, then maybe depending on how you got them, but probably not, right? And if you did that from campaigns where you were actually proving out that strategy, then maybe it's time to lean into the marketing side of things. But all things being equal, is probably not. And so it's like, okay, now we're going to hypothesize where can we find more that look like our core user like set, what makes them particularly loyal, like what about them, is going to translate into a loyal user, and then how do we find those people online, and then where, or in person or wherever else, and like what's the cheapest and most efficient way to get in front of them. That's kind of where my mind
yeah,
with it.
For sure. No, I think so. I mean, I think the like big takeaways, and then we did get a question that came on in, so we'll take that one live. And thanks, Daniel, for joining and throwing your question in there. But yeah, I think the like, oftentimes when we see founders like present like their current status, right? They say like, oh, we have a small group of this, and for our minds jumping into like, well, how are you defining what that looks like? And then also, what does loyal mean? Like, what are those behaviors or like actions they're taking to demonstrate that? And that evidence is what, as you're pitching an advisor or a next person to, maybe you're trying to sell another customer and you're like, hey, well, we have this, really small loyal group that you could be a part of and shaping, having that evidence and like clear understanding of what you're actually articulating to them will be key. But shall we hop into throwing Daniel's on the screen? So
let's do it.
Cool. So thanks again, Daniel, for the question coming in here. So Daniel's curious about how do you advise startups to balance showcasing immediate traction, so signing deals now, with articulating the big picture vision for investors? Do you want to kick us off?
Sure. So hey, Daniel's one of our new friends here. So happy to see you hop on. So I think a couple things come to mind, right? So the first is that both are going to matter a great deal, but only one of them really counts as evidence. And so if we're trying to, like, if we're raising, I'm assuming that's why we want to showcase this for investors. Like, so if we're raising around, and a big part of that use of funds, for example, is on the customer acquisition side, then the big picture vision is sort of secondary in that context to like actually making, like, what is the theory behind that use of funds? Like, why are we doing it this way, and how is it going to work? And so that immediate traction is actually what's going to translate into future traction. So that's why that matters. If like that's not really the big focus there, and we're looking at trying to articulate the size of the opportunity for like a pre-seed round here, and so like the traction stuff, yeah, we got some good evidence and it's cool. Like, hey, we got this early stuff. Don't read too much into it, right? We're not sure how many of these are actually our ICP yet. We're kind of working through that, but hey, like we did find this severe and urgent problem, and like they're starting to like this solution. So now we can paint this really big picture of how we can solve it in that space. And I would kind of lean into it on that side. So it kind of depends on the goal and the stage as well, but only one of them counts as evidence, which I think is the important distinction between those two things. One other thing comes to mind, which is a really common. I don't know if this is exactly where you were going with it, Daniel, but like one of the really common things that we see is where the initial version of the product, not necessarily MVP, but like what we're doing, like pre-seed, even seed, maybe like leaning into Series A, is like our product is kind of a far cry from what we want to do because it's our wedge, right? And so like we're getting into the market to do this amazing things. Maybe at the same time we're building in some AI or some whatever that we need to train the data on, or it's just a matter of like getting like this is our wedge into the market, and then we're going to expand in this broader vision. So like if you have that kind of example, like two things usually come up, right? It's like if you talk too much about the early traction, it's like this reductive thing. It's like it's not what we're trying to do, right? Like it's just our wedge. It's how we're getting into market. So like that we get that tension between like talking a lot about the progress we're making that seems somewhat disconnected from the broader vision, and then you have like this big picture vision, and the balancing test there is sort of the same, right? Whereas like, are we talking about like early evidence or broad term evidence? So there's two kind of approaches that I usually recommend in different circumstances in a pitch, and so one of them is you set up the entire pitch with the short-term vision and then roadmap the long-term vision at the end, right? So like you roadmap slide, and but that's not all, folks. Like there's all this other awesome stuff. And then the flip side of that is to pitch the big vision and then bury the small vision in the go-to-market slide, right? So like those are the two big approaches that I see. There's other ones too, but those are kind of the big categories of them. And which one is right or wrong depends, I think, on a couple of things. So one is how believable the big vision is. So if the big vision sounds like a cockamamie scheme, like I see this a lot with people trying to solve systemic issues, right? Like you can't solve that all at once. You have to get individual customers and then connect the ecosystem together. So like in that case, you can't just go straight for that big vision. It doesn't work. Nobody believes you. So that's one. And then the other one is whether or not that reductive, smaller version of this is actually an interesting business in and of itself. So like a good example of that is one of our portfolio companies at the Traction Lab, which is 811 Spotter, and so they're a tool to help the like people who have to dig, like contractors who have to dig, file those 811 tickets, which right now is a process from the 1970s. And so like that in the short term, like it's helping them do their jobs and like get accurate data on where they can dig and where they might need a little extra caution in digging. But the long-term vision on that is like a really big data play, right? Because now there's going to be the single source of just a massive amount of data on underground lines, and there's like 900 ways to monetize that, a lot of which we won't even know right now. And so like, but that 811 ticketing aspect of this is a super interesting and profitable business in and of itself. So it makes sense to pitch that whole thing, right? Because it doesn't, like, if you can then paint the broader vision like of the data play, but you're not dependent upon it for funding because it's still interesting enough. So it's just like a sweetener. Like, and oh, by the way, there's all this other cool thing. So people like me who love data plays are like think that like 811 Spotter is super sexy because it's this profitable business that you can turn into something highly scalable with a decent exit. And at the same time, you could also blow it up into something much more massive that looks very different in the future. So like that was an example of that. And then Daniel added on, is it sometimes investor specific? Yeah, it is. Like, especially when you're in the earlier stages and decisions are made much more on an individual level, like angels versus funds that have a thesis. Then yeah, you're going to get a lot of like, some people just like really want to see like financials and traction, and they want to see all this stuff. And the other ones are like, I want to like you, and I want a big vision, and like get me all fired up about the thing. So for sure. What are your thoughts, Cameron? I've rambled for a while.
Well, no, for sure. It's all good stuff. I think two things I would add. One is like, as I think of the kind of first question, is what comes to mind is that Brandon Brown visual that we've talked about, is like the data points and then the regression line. And so as you think about like the fundraising, was the big vision is validated in the credibility of your ability to gain traction here and now. And so you might be able to paint this like beautiful vision picture, but the traction really gives that credibility component that you can take action, actually that there's demand in the market. And so those things can go hand in in hand and ultimately support one another as you go forward. So that was the first point. And then the second point, to kind of, is it sometimes investor specific? I definitely think so. I mean, there's people in the Sacramento ecosystem who are like, hey, like, just tell me that big vision, and like, who's rallying behind you to get there. And then also some that might be, putting a little more pressure at an early stage for traction. But I think finding that happy medium to be able to speak to, here's what we're doing here and now, here's the evidence we're gaining in the market, and this is ultimately what's going to allow us to expand into this larger vision. But I think painting a big picture without traction can sometimes fall pretty flat. And oftentimes when we paint the big vision, the context is missing of like, who is actually the customer? Is there actually a pain point? And so you see these in like really big, like a big data play, or hey, here's a change in the market space, but there's actually no, like, you don't articulate a problem for anyone. And so they're like, okay, that's really interesting, and I see the change in the industry, but I don't know who's actually feeling the pain point. And so is anyone actually going to be moving? And so that could be validated with that early traction and signals that you get there.
Awesome. So cool. Yeah, I think that's great. I think we probably went all around the bush around that one.
Yeah. Did we find the bird or whatever?
We did. We pushed branches aside. We got scratches on our face now from hunting in there. But
it's
more
like
than happy to.
Golf ball. I was looking for my golf ball. I couldn't find it.
Yes. Eventually, you just got to be like, I give up. Like, I got another one in the bag. We're good. Yeah, exactly. Just drop. And with that, I'll drop in a new question. If you have follow-ups on that, Daniel, definitely feel free to drop them in the chat. I know it's hard to give us appropriate context in a LinkedIn comment, but that was really cool. So here, should we do maybe one or two more?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. All right. So here's one. Actually, reading through this, I know the two that I want to do. Okay. So here they are. You ready for this?
Yeah.
All right. So this one is it's some type of B2B workflow automation tool. So I'm assuming it's like a SaaS model. We see a lot of those, obviously, in our. Yeah, we're just talking about one of those yesterday. Funny. But a B2B workflow automation tool of some kind. All right. So they've had. Ouch. We've had 10 demos, but only one signed customer. Is that normal at this stage? So what do you think? Traction or not traction? You want to play our game?
So is that normal? Well, odds are 90% of startups fail. So yes, I would say that probably is.
Oh, man. Oh, whoa.
Well, let me put the JDM book aside. I had ripped out a page of the JDM book.
I gotta go. I need to dig in the Cameron Law book. I'm gonna have to pick up these pieces here. Jeez.
So no, I don't know how to come back from that one.
Oh, that's gold.
So is it normal? I mean, I don't know that. I guess the question might not be the right question. Is it normal? I'd say I have concerns about what you're seeing. So I think there's a couple things of like, okay, at the start of the demo, or not the start of the demo, the start of kind of this pilot that you're running with them, and them not converting into being a paying customer. Like, was the price and things set at the beginning, or was that something that then came later and they had no context, and then maybe there was a misalignment with value, and so maybe it wasn't that they actually didn't not get value out of the product, but the pricing that you then set after the fact was kind of a shock to them. So that's maybe one particular element. I think the other is, in relation to this pilot, did they activate in the way that you wanted to, and in the time span that you're ultimately trying to set out to engage with? And so we've often seen in a lot of these workflow ones, there's a lot of data and integration that needs to take place. And so was a lot of that initial inertia, not allowing them to get to this kind of full-fledged value that you thought you could deliver in that time span. And so I think that those would be the questions that I would be really looking at. And so is it normal? I mean, yes, maybe contextually it's normal, but is it a concern? Yes, I think that's something I would look at, but you kind of have to peel back the onion of it's not just that you might be hitting out of the park in terms of the value, but you misalign some of the pricing and the structure around the initial on ramp of them using the product. And particularly if it's like they created their workflows and they have like this full-fledged thing that's already rocking and they have the artifact to go with it. Do they need it after the fact? They got the thing that they needed, and now they can, quote unquote, walk away from the process from there. So those are what comes to mind for me. What about you, JD?
Yeah, my mind sort of went to the same place. I don't have a huge amount to add. I would say like it's normal in the sense that I do see it a lot. All joking aside, I think it's concerning. It's not the end of the world. I do think it's concerning, and it's worth diagnosing like where that's coming from, because it is concerning. A couple of specific things come to mind. So one for me is this like a severity urgency thing, right? So like sometimes, and this is probably not the case here, but it's really common to have a severe problem with no urgency. So the severity gets you the demo, but the urgency is what's going to close it. And so if it's not an urgent problem for them, like it just peters kind of off after that, right? Because you had the interest, it might even say during the demo, this is great, this is amazing, this is cool, and then just afterward because it's not the most important problem on their list. And so your job is to find out what is the most important problem on their list. Is that, or the top 2 or 3 problems, because it's maybe number 4 or 5. And like, is that adjacent enough that you could solve that as a positioning thing, or is it the wrong customer, right? So that's one. Another thing that comes to mind that's sort of related to that is that it's really common when you get demos for what you think is your ICP to kind of fake interest. Like it's awkward, right? You're on a call there, and so like they're going to do the thing, and it's never really interesting. But what I think they're like how you got the demo is going to matter. I think most of the time that demo is coming because something resonated with them on a message somewhere, and was that on the problem side? And so if you just got the demo based on the problem, then it means the solution didn't align, and that's interesting, right? And so, but if it was problem and solution, and the demo didn't close it, now like okay, now we have more questions, and we want to know why, and that's where I might lean back into that like severity urgency matrix there. So those are some of the things that come to mind. But like if you open a thread like that, I really do want to see like that like a feedback loop gets closed somewhere in there. Like what's the date, like from the one that signed, the 9 didn't. I'm much more interested in the 9 than I am the 1. Right? Like if you had a close rate of like 6 out of 10, then I'd be like, what makes the 6 different than the 4? And let's find more of the 6. But if 1 out of 10 closed, and while I could be convinced that the other route is interesting, and like we just need to narrow in on that one, and we just like maybe we had a shotgun approach, and so we just got a bunch of people in, and like one of them we think is probably representative of our ICP, and the other 9 we're just kind of cruft. Then it can be about, all right, great, let's figure out how we stop talking to the 9 because they're wasting our time. But with that ratio, I'm guessing that that's not the case, and that the case is actually that like that 9 is much more interesting, and I want to know why they're not closing.
So yeah, and I think though, like we've heard this a lot recently, was they kind of blame it on a sales process, whereas like, oh, we didn't have the right objection handle, and like I think that there's a misalignment of like at this point you're not doing quote unquote like sales, right? Like you're more in that validation, and like you're then converting them to customers, and so you are making a sale, but not in the traditional sense of like, okay, we have the full-fledged product and the value prop dialed in. We're still in that process of refining and honing that, and so I think what I would take from what you were saying was like pulling from the 9. He said, no, we can clearly define from that pattern what they're not. So as you'd say is like define that negative space more easily to then allow us to see how do we get in front of more of those potential ones to then convert going forward. And that like don't fall into the trap of like, oh, well, we just need to have better objection handling and closing them on this deal, when that might not be that's not the fundamental issue that you're ultimately trying to tackle, because then you're saying the product is done and like you're trying to find out who it is, versus like, oh, well, maybe there's something that needs to change based on the value prop or how you set up the pilots going forward.
I think this. I don't have the calendar in front of me, but I think this sales objection thing is also our topic for Zero to Traction next week. Exactly. All right, so awesome. So if that's you, tune in next week to the Zero to Traction podcast, because we're going to do a kind of a deep dive into that whole sales objection side of things. Last thing I'll say about this before we move on to the final question is that one of the things that we're often doing, we being Cameron and I at the Traction Lab, is this, like, you could call it sales funnel anatomy. We usually frame it from a pirate metrics perspective, which is where we're going to want to look at the math from acquisition, activation into revenue. And if we're further along, then we're also going to take a look at retention and referral, right? If we're in like the seed or Series A stages. And we want to see the math along the way, because that's going to tell us whether or not we actually have a big enough market, or if there's some place that we're not, that this isn't just working. So one of the ways that you'll see that is, like, if you're getting tons of acquisition and then we're getting no activation, then like the part that we need to fix is related to the activation side. But if we're doing tons of outbound sales and we're not getting the acquisition, then like trying to focus on how we do the activation is probably not super relevant, because the sample's too low and it's not a big problem. Like, we often talk about like the lever that you can pull, right? So the acquisition lever, the activation lever, the revenue lever, right? To what is going to have the greatest impact on like flow, through your business toward revenue, retention, and referral. And it's not going to be the activation if you can't get the acquisition in the door, right? If you can't get customers in the door, who cares if you retain them, right? So we often use that as a diagnostic thing too. So one of the things that I would also look at is, if you're having that like 10-to-1 ratio, maybe your ratio isn't as bad as that for some of our other listeners. Go through that math and kind of see where in the funnel, like, we're actually seeing that drop off, and that might tell us something interesting. But a lot of that's going to be based on like how you got those 10 demos. So. Last one. All right. So this one here is I guess a marketplace to find per diem nurses.
To find what?
Per diem nurses. Those are part-time nurses.
Sure.
So they, fractional nurses that they like travel around and where you need to fill them. Okay, but it's a marketplace to find these nurses. So we're seeing demand from one side of the marketplace, but not the other. How do we fix this? They don't tell us which side. I'm guessing it's the nurses, but I don't know. We're seeing demand from one side of the marketplace, but not the other. How do we fix this?
So I'd be curious. So was your assumption that the nurses aren't interested, or the other side of it?
My assumption was that the nurses were the ones that were interested.
Okay. Same.
Yeah.
Well,
I don't know.
There's a big nurse shortage, though, so I felt like I would have gone probably the other way, that there was more of an urgent pain point on the. I don't know who the other side is. Is that like facilities, or like, I'm not sure who the other side, and maybe that's part of it. Is it might be a little broad. Like, is this? I don't know if hospitals can hire nurses through platforms like that, or I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah. There's a lot of questions. I think we probably need to in order to actually dive into this question, maybe we can use it as as kind of a means to explore this space, like a framing device here. So, we always talk about like cold start in marketplaces, and we have 3 or 4 marketplaces in our portfolio at the Traction Lab where we have to deal with some level of this too. And there's always 3 things for me. It's chicken and egg, it's side seeding, and it's density, or AKA liquidity. Like, those are the big things that come to mind for me. So we always talk about the chicken and egg problem, right? Like, nobody's going to go onto a platform looking for nurses if there are no nurses to find, and no nurses want to sign up for the platform if there's nobody to hire them, right? So it's this like chicken and egg, which one comes first? And that's like universally a challenge with marketplaces. And there's 2 really common approaches to solve that. So one is called side seeding. So this is where you like pick one side and focus on that first, and it's usually the supply side because they're more patient, right? So it's far easier, like in this example, probably to find a facility to list themselves on the platform. It's probably harder to find like the facilities to list themselves on the platform and hunt for nurses when they need a nurse now, right? And so that's like, so they're not going to use it if there isn't a supply of nurses there, because they're not going to find one. And the whole point was that they need one. Whereas on the nursing side, it's like, hey, yeah, I fill my calendar with these part-time nursing gigs, and so I'll put myself on this platform, and maybe I'll get something next week or something. They can be a bit more patient with the process, and so oftentimes you do that side seeding where you just get a bunch of nurses and then go, hey, we have all these nurses over here. So that's like one way to approach it. The other one is I always like call it density, but it's I think the technical term for it is liquidity, and the idea is that back to the nursing example, there's a transaction to be completed. and that transaction is hiring. I'm assuming, right? Hiring a nurse for this part-time whatever, this per diem position. And so that's the transaction. And so you actually go you figure out a way to get like density either through geography or through other like the types of nurses. So you don't have all kinds of nurses, but we're just looking at critical care nurses, or we're looking at ER nurses, or something like that. And you couple all those things together, and you don't need a huge volume on the supply side in order to get the businesses interested, because you have that density, right? And so like it's technically liquidity, because then what it means is like you have enough density on the platform that a transaction can be completed at the time that they want it to be completed, without that like waiting period that that side seating kind of gets around by starting with one side. So those are a few things that come to mind there as like approaches for kind of getting around the chicken and egg problem, but you can't avoid the chicken and egg problem.
Yeah, no, the only thing I would maybe add to it is, we've talked a little bit about like, can you just like almost, and maybe concierge is not the right term, but like facilitate some of those transactions and like have the medium come through the platform. But like maybe you start as like, oh, I know of a few nurses, and then you connect them to the ER or whatever that needs them, and so you actually are like kind of brokering that deal, and then you facilitate that process through the platform, and now then ultimately that becomes a place that they ultimately go to. They see that as the like trusted source for actually identifying these nurses that they're looking for. So I think that can be one way that you might tackle it as well. But.
Awesome. And if you want to give us a little bit more detail on the platform, like throw that our way, and we'll try to get a little bit more specific here instead of kind of giving you a general answer. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for right now. You can send us your questions through email. You can add us on wherever you're listening to this. So if you're watching the replay on Substack, drop it in the comments or DM me on Substack. You can leave a LinkedIn comment or send us an in-mail message. You can send me an email. There's all kinds of ways. Throw your question this way. Happy to address it. I actually have like some really good questions in the queue here, so I'm gonna bring this list with us next week, and kind of keep talking about this. But you guys are awesome, great questions. Keep the questions coming. Daniel, thanks for joining live and asking a question. Those are always our favorite to answer live, because we like the conversation side of things. But we got to get Cameron to the beach. Katie's waiting patiently.
Yeah, it's, you got priorities, I guess. I made it nonetheless. So, but no, happy to join the office hours here. Thank you for the questions. Do tune in to our Zero to Traction coming up. I think it'll be a good discussion about some of the topics we chatted about here, and then we'll be dialed in next week for another startup office hours. So please do, if you want to submit your questions ahead of time, or we'd love to have you join live. Maybe we'll see if it's technically feasible to do a Substack as well, and we can maybe bring your lovely faces on screen as well. So.
That would be it would be cool. Yeah, we haven't done the Substack live in a few weeks, so it'd be fun to get back onto. But awesome. Well, have fun down in San Diego. Crush it at the marathon. Enjoy the music. Hopefully, I'm looking forward to hearing kind of who was playing along the sidelines and like how
hopefully
that actually worked.
Good, right?
I mean, like I don't know. I like Kesha. That's fine. So cool. Well, have a fantastic weekend. Enjoy the beach.
And it sounds like it's Liam's birthday this weekend.
No, his birthday is in 2 weekends from now, and so we're just
early celebration for you all.
Go
enjoy the.
He's sick right now, so we're not going to get out this weekend, unfortunately. So we're planning it soon.
All right, game on. Well, thank you all, and we'll see you next time.